Heads Trails Outdoor Classrooms today is at Cypress Dome and Marsh Trails at Corkscrew Swamp Regional Ecosystem Watershed. That's a mouthful. We call it CREW for short, here in Collier County, Florida. So I've been out in the on the trails looking at the differences between a field of grass and what is a wetland marsh. Alrighty, so we are off and ready to go. So you can see I got my water carabinered right to my backpack strap right there. Got my apple. I'm going to start eating that in a moment. The field is just down this trail a little bit. And again, we're looking at soil types and why one area is a marsh and one area is an open field. Right now I'm walking on this sugar sand road. So I'm going to stop here and I'm going to actually sample this, gather a bag of this for my collection of sugar sand. The way I mark location and type of pickup is simply taking a photo on my phone of that soil sample. Later on, the picture on the phone will give me the location data and the exact location where I picked up this soil. And I'm also going to mark that Cypress Dome, trail, sand. So, like we said, soil is made up of three main components: silt, clay, and sand. Here's the sand. I'm in the middle of this field and it is dry, bone dry. We've had plenty of rain. It's July in Florida. It's the rainy season, and yet this field is dry. The marsh, which we're going to be going over into in a minute, has water in it. So I'm trying to figure out why is this area of grass dry and the marsh, which is also an area of grass, wet? Let's examine the soil and see if we can't find out. Okay, we're going to auger down, and I'm not going to go too deep. Going down about a foot, 10 inches to a foot. Give it a couple of twists just to make sure the soil is in there. Even as I'm pulling it out, I can see some of it spilling out. So the first thing I want to look at is the color of the soil that I'm pulling out. Very gray. There's a lot of white in there. There's some speckled brown, some speckles of black mixed in, but it's mostly white to gray. It's very consistent from the bottom of the sample to the top of the sample. I don't see any layering. I don't see any transition layers. There's one plug right at the top here. I don't want to disturb it, but there's one plug right at the top that is holding together a little bit better, and that's because of the dead plant material that's right there at the top. But underneath is very, very sandy. I can tell just by looking at it that this soil is sandy. So I'm going to put it in the baggie marked Dome Pavilion Field Center, and I want to make sure that I get all of that in there, including that plug from the top that contained the plant material, because we'll be able to separate that plant matter out later on in the garage. Now you can do this. You can do this at home. You can do this in a classroom. You don't need an auger. You can just use a shovel and just dig down in and pull some of that soil up and gather a sample that way. So zip it up, throw it in the pocket, and now we're going to move over to the edge of the field and grab our second sample from the edge. So just walking on a line through the field out here at Crew Dome. It's very dry. There's no water. There's lots of plants. The tallest plants are about knee-high. So now I'm over at the picnic table on the edge of the field. I've walked all the way from the pavilion across that field in a straight line. So I'm going to take another sample now of soil right here on the edge of this field and compare it to the first sample that I took. Dome pavilion edge, field edge. Take a picture of that when I'm done. Down in there. Bring that back up. Very, very similar to the sample from the center. Very similar. A little bit of dead plant matter at the top of the sample. The rest of the sample is the same coloring. It's that gray. I've now gathered 2 samples of soil from this field. One from the center, one from the edge. We're going to take a close look at that soil back in the garage, and we're going to see if we can answer the question, why is this field of grass dry? And the marsh, which is also a field of grass, why is the marsh wet? Why is there water there, but not here?
Ooh, yeah.
Okay, so Jane and I are here. We're getting wet and muddy and gooey, and we're in all this grass. And earlier we asked the question, what's the difference between a field and a marsh? So Jane, where are we now?
We're still in a marsh. Now we're on the outer edge of the marsh, but it's still dominated by grasses. This is the sawgrass. Again, if you get a chance to run your finger very gently the opposite way, you'll feel why it's called sawgrass. But you can tell by what's underneath our knees or our feet here. It's very wet, so marshes tend to be more wet. But also as you squash around with your shoes or your knees in this case, you can see there's a lot of moisture still in the soil. Though marshes are like big sponges, we talked about that earlier, so they soak up a lot of water and they hold on to it, and then it dries out very slowly, so that water's available to us and wildlife.
Okay. So I'm going to take a soil sample here. I took some soil samples in the field at the Dome Trail. Now we're out in the marsh, and I'm going to take some soil here. Go down in there. Wow, look at that. The first thing I'm looking at is always the color. What is the color? It's very gray, somewhat blackish up here, mostly gray. Ooh, that soil is so fine. It's just a really fine soil that's down there underneath the plant matter. And just like we saw out in the dry field, there's a little bit of plant matter. That's what's causing that black up at the top here. I actually pulled up a piece of grass. A little bit of plant matter up at the top, and then the rest is this very, very fine soil. So we're going to put that in the bag, and look at how wet that is. And that water is not dripping out. That water's staying right in there. So one thing that we know about this soil is that it holds water really, really well. Look at how well it's holding its shape. That's very different from the sand that we pulled up from the field. Oh, cool.
Yes, it's amazing.
Okay, so that right there, that explains a lot. Being able to hold that chunk of soil, it's almost like a modeling clay like you'd use in art class. Now, it's not the same as modeling clay that you use in art class, because that modeling clay, I can stretch it and pull it and do all kinds of good stuff to it. But this stuff, it's so strong, it's so sticky, it's holding together, it's not falling apart. That's a good chunk of soil right there. I'm going to put this one in a separate bag just because that particular piece is holding its shape so well. I wonder if that sample isn't different from this, okay? This is still kind of chunky, but look at that. See how those two are different? So I wonder if that layer, and that was down as far as I went, I wonder if that layer is different from this layer. So we're gonna do some more investigation on that.